Hello, viewers, and welcome to episode 19 of Watchtower in Focus, the show that zooms in on all things JW, bringing the governing body and its teachings under microscopic scrutiny. As we enter the final few hours of 2018, it seems fitting to review what has proved to be an incredible 12 months in the world of Jehovah's Witnesses and ex-JW activism. Here to help me pick through the highlights are my regular co-hosts, Mark O'Donnell, otherwise known as John Redwood, and part-time news-reading sensation, Covert Fade.
Hello, everyone.
Hello there. I'm getting feedback, but let me press on because I have some more guests to introduce. Joining the proceedings, we have a friend of the show and film producer, Javier Ortiz, and a newcomer, Bethany Lachey. Bethany is a writer, artist, psychology major, author of Alive and Well, a healing journal for the shunned, and proprietor of the hit and coming YouTube channel, Stop the Shunning. Javier and Beth, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Hello. Bad feedback.
Yeah, has anyone got the live stream going on their speakers?
Thank you for having me.
Hello. Bad feedback.
Yeah, that's better.
Was it me? It was me.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking, I don't understand. Where else do I need to cut it off?
Sorry about that.
No problem. So anyway, we've got the introductions out of the way. We now need to focus on what, again, has been an incredible 12 months. So we have got a few notes to go through. And I think one of the most outstanding things about 2018 has been the activism side. It feels as though activism in terms of Watchtower and raising awareness of abusive policies of Watchtower has just gone up a gear. But let's start at the very beginning, which is a very good place to start, so I'm told. And on January the 9th, we had the Palmer leaks unveiled. And this was a huge story which we covered on Watchtower in Focus. On January the 18th, Watchtower settled in Delaware, avoiding a public trial for breaking Delaware's mandatory child abuse reporting laws. And on January 17th, there was an off-Broadway play, Revelations, debuting in New York City. And also it was in January that the Pillowgate videos were released.
Yay!
So right in the first few days of 2018, there was so much happening. Are there any stories there that stand out to you guys?
Well, the Pillowgate started the year off with a bang.
Yeah, in more ways than one.
I think the Pillowgate one, it's worth bringing up because it's in some ways it's one of the least serious. I mean, on there, obviously, we've got stories regarding child abuse and other things. The Pillowgate one was A, hilarious, but B, actually exposed the absurdity of the pharisaical and almost psychotic obsession with sex and rulemaking that exists within the leadership of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and kind of blew it open for the whole world to see. And there were actually, remember, there were other YouTube channels and even some comedy shows picking up on this footage and playing it because it is so hysterically funny. They say one of the best ways you can deal with a cult is to laugh at them, and I think the whole world was laughing during that.
Agreed.
Yeah. I just remember seeing that video and thinking, how are people on the outside going to look at this and say, that's an organization I want to join? You're like, how is that appealing? I don't know if am I on? Okay. Yeah. Just checking to make sure.
Yeah.
Muted. Yeah. But yeah, it's just so bizarre. Yeah. We want to be just as repressed and crazy about this as you guys. Yeah. Where do I sign up?
Indeed.
Such a bizarre video.
Indeed. And Mark, you were following closely events in Delaware. I don't think we really explained those on the channel too much. Maybe you can just fill out what happened there a little bit. Mark, if you're there.
He's having technical problems, I think.
Yeah, he is.
You might be muted.
Yeah, Mark, you might need to unmute or... And this is before we even get trolleyed with alcohol, so goodness knows what it's going to be like later. Okay, so maybe we'll come back.
I shall interpret.
Yeah, we'll hope that Mark can figure that out, and in the meantime,
there's actually there's an interesting question just come in from the chat whilst Mark is battering his audio setup with a hammer. The question is, it's from Ben Dover. He says, I've noticed that there seem to be less leaks being released. And I think this is interesting because if you look at the beginning of this year, there was this flurry of leaks. And then he says, is this a case of Watchtower having identified and dealt with the mole? Or in your opinion, is the source of all these leaks lying low? So guys, what do you think about that?
I think that leaks are a tricky thing. When we get leaks, they tend to be in brief windows, because let's face it, if you're inside the organization and you're sufficiently awake to be leaking material, it's going to be hell with, apart from anything else, with your cognitive dissonance. But just to be in a Bethel setting 24 hours a day throughout the week, doing nothing but being surrounded by Watchtower and, you know, reminders of the fact that you're in a cult, there's a shelf life there for you to be of use in getting leaks out. So when leaks do come, by nature, we have to kind of capitalize on them as quickly as possible, knowing that the person leaking isn't going to be there forever. Because either usually they're not found out, but usually I think they just move on. They find a way of getting out of that situation. But it's good that while they're in that situation, they're able to get some information out. That seems to be where we are, and there does seem to be a dry spell at the moment, if I'm honest.
Plus, I imagine that once you've leaked a video, you know, everyone's looking for a mole, and that's got to be hectic way to live at headquarters. If you know you're the one who's leaked the video and it's out there, and that everything is being scrutinized and they're looking for you, you know, I can't imagine someone would last very long in that situation.
Indeed. Indeed.
Especially when those leaks are like, it's either so many of these leaks either relate to, you know, child abuse, so the organization looks terrible and is legally liable, or it's something like, as we'll come on to later, internal financial information, or it's just something like Pillowgate, which makes them look like absolute fools.
Yeah, Pillowgate was the motherlode of all leaks, I think. Yeah. So I'm wondering whether, Mark, you have wrestled your audio equipment into some kind of working order. Nope. So we'll crack on with our year, because we've got, again, so much to go through. Moving into February, we had the convention videos leaked. So you bear in mind that it's usually in sort of May that we start to see the convention videos, because they start being shown at actual conventions. Oh, there he is.
Hey.
Hi there,
sorry,
Mark.
guys. It seems we have some gremlins in here today. We were working fine ahead of time, but
yeah,
this is what happens when you read news that isn't yours to read.
There it is. I think I've been sabotaged by covert fade.
Yeah. Some ugly animosity going on between Covert and Mark viewers. You must excuse us. Unfinished business, unfortunately.
Yes. But show your face, Covert.
But Mark, could you just briefly explain what happened in Delaware? Because I think that is an interesting story, which we didn't really cover much on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So that was a case that actually started developing in 2015, and it was where the state of Delaware had actually gone up against Watchtower for its failure to report child abuse. And this is very unusual because we don't see many cases where a state actually takes a religion to court because of failure to apply child abuse mandatory reporting laws. But they held Jehovah's Witnesses accountable. There were 2 elders in a Delaware congregation that failed to report the child abuse of a 14-year-old boy by they were both baptized by a Jehovah's Witness woman who was more than twice his age. As a result, Watchtower actually tried to quietly settle this case. It was going to go to trial at the beginning of 2018, And Watchtower settled in an agreement, which ironically was only $500 less than what the state was actually trying to fine the Jehovah's Witnesses. The fine was $10,000 per elder for failure to report child abuse. And they settled for $19,500. The Watchtower had to pay that. And a few months later, I actually was able to file a Freedom of Information Act request and obtain the documents proving that Watchtower had signed this document. But what's interesting is that they also were required to attend mandatory child abuse training for reporting child abuse. In fact, all of the elders in Delaware, all congregations were required to comply. So what I find significant about this ruling is not the $20,000 fine, because that's really pocket change for Watchtower, but it's the fact that they continually tell the public that they always report child abuse whenever it is mandated by law. And here's a perfect example of a very recent case in which they broke the law and did not report, and the state of Delaware said, we've had enough. I've spoken to the Attorney General myself about this, who handled that case, and she was quite cooperative. And let me tell you, I think these public officials have really had enough of organizations like Watchtower covering up the abuse of children, because they know how sinister that is. And they also know that if it's covered up, then another child and another child or another family member or even friend could get abused by the same person that abused a witness child. So there's a trickle-down effect, and I just want to give my props to the state of Delaware for, going ahead and filing that lawsuit. And we have an article on JW Survey about that, along with all the documentation. So these are public documents. If any Jehovah's Witnesses are reading right now, these are court documents. They're not apostate documents, and you can just go on to our site or send a private request, and we'll send them to you.
Fantastic. And again, we didn't manage to do, I don't think, a Watchtower in Focus on that, but at least we've managed to summarize it there. And again, there's more information on JW Survey for those who want to look into it in more detail. We have actually had a super chat through, thank you, Cynthia, of $5. And I should just mention, we've decided to donate all proceeds from the super chat for this episode to the forthcoming Truth About the Truth documentary. We're hoping that we can Javier, we're hoping we can get that over the line soon. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Lloyd, and it'll go to good use.
Indeed, indeed. Are you able to give us any information on the progress with that and what your expectations are?
Yeah, we're hoping to wrap it up this year, in this coming year in 2019. We've got a couple of interviews scheduled next month, or January 2019, and our goal is to make it to Australia this year. Australia and Montreal. So we're going to try to get there, and hopefully we can.
Don't be surprised if there is a Watchtower in Focus down under at some point. That's all I'm going to say. So, moving on to February. Again, we had those leaked convention videos. One of the standout videos was a video portraying allies of the LGBT community as angry and vindictive and confrontational. There was also a video about basically frightening a child with stories about Armageddon and imagery of stepping over dead bodies. Those were among the leaked videos. Also in February, the Dutch Parliament began to discuss issues raised by reclaimed voices. On February the 5th, JW Survey released an article about Watchtower's lawsuit against the publisher of Misha Verilay's riveting book, Goodbye, Jehovah. On February the 14th, a congregation in Massachusetts disfellowshipped Judas, the JW responsible for leaking the Palmer documents, which we didn't talk about too much, but maybe now that Mark's back, he can comment on that. Actually, let's kind of stop there, and then I can proceed with a few other events from February. So, Mark, what can you tell us about the whole Palmer phenomenon in early 2018 and how that played out?
Yeah, you mentioned what happened in January, and it was really there was a spark ignited when Gizmodo and Newsweek both covered the release of these documents known as the Palmer leaks. And Palmer is a congregation up in Massachusetts. What we had discovered was that an individual had removed a number of documents from inside a congregation's files, and it turns out that it was more than one congregation. It was multiple congregations, and obviously there's some things that we can't discuss on air, and there were some reasons why we had to do everything possible to protect the individual who had obtained these files. I'm trying to be careful with what I say here, but suffice it to say that the gentlemen who run Mormon Leaks and also Faith Leaks operate the Truth and Transparency Project, and they were the ones who redacted those files and ended up placing them on the faithleaks.org website. So I think I hope most of our listeners, viewers are familiar with those websites, because they reveal documents to create transparency and honesty among religious organizations like the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses. So what happened was Newsweek and Gizmodo both covered this. Watchtower found out that they had a very big problem on their hands, and they went after the individual that they suspected had taken the documents. And as you mentioned there, it was actually on February 14th that they disfellowshipped an individual that we're not going to name at this point, but I will say that within the next year, stay tuned, because our viewers and others will find out who this individual was and a little bit more information about why he did what he did. So the documents were leaked on Faith Leaks, and suffice it to say, it was very difficult for people to read these, because that one congregation's documents that were released, and there are many others, were very disturbing, because they told the tale of a man who had sexually abused both of his daughters and a third individual, by the way, that is now an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and we're going to be hearing more about that individual in the coming months. But there were 3 victims of this man, and what had happened was he had been an elder for some time and was bouncing from congregation to congregation between Massachusetts and Maine, other places. And this individual was at one point disfellowshipped, but then reinstated. And I don't really want to get into the graphic details. I think most people that have seen the Palmer leaks have an idea of what had happened there, except without the names, which have been redacted. But I would like to say that there, were many, many more cases that were uncovered that the public will be hearing about in the coming months. And like Watchtower has done in the past, they immediately went after the individual who they suspected as having done this. And what's interesting is that the disfellowshipping took place in a congregation in Massachusetts, in which the witnesses that they used to disfellowship this person were a disfellowshipped person was witness number 1, because remember, they need 2 witnesses. And 2, there was an inactive or unbaptized witness. That both of these individuals were the persons that were used. And I can't explain right now, I can't tell you exactly what happened, because that might reveal some identifying information, but it was fascinating to find out that Watchtower had instructed the congregation to disfellowship this person for allegedly taking documents. And so I think a lot of people were, we don't encourage criminal activity of any type, but I think a lot of people are really shocked to find out what Watchtower had concealed. And it gave credence to the fact that, people will accuse apostates of saying, these are apostate lies. Watchtower's not concealing information or harboring child abuse files, or they always report things to the police. Well, the fact is that in most cases, they have done everything possible to avoid reporting child abuse to the police and treating it strictly as an internal matter of sin. And only when pressed against the wall do they report any matters to the police. And even then, as we learned in Delaware, they don't. So I don't know if any of our...
Mark, I have a question for you about that.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Javier.
So it's kind of a two-part question. So the person who leaked, I know you can't say too much about him, but or him or her, but is this person at risk, for criminal charges or anything like that because of those leaks? And the second part of that question is there anything in the law about protections for whistleblowers that would maybe help him out?
Yeah. So yeah, there are sunshine laws, and that's something that you can Google and look into that. But I suppose the first part of your question is yes, and I will tell you that Watchtower immediately contacted Faith Leaks, and their goal in doing so was to extract information from the people who run Faith Leaks. And actually, Watchtower contacted the police, local congregation contacted the police, and the police then called Faith Leaks. And Faith Leaks didn't have to give up any information because they had done it properly. They had redacted the names of the individuals. And basically what they told the police was that, look, we don't know where the information came from. We don't have to tell you anything. And even if we did know where it came from, legally, we're not obligated to divulge that information to you. But what the police had said to Faith Leaks was that they were more concerned not as much about the theft of documents from a congregation, but the fact that there were existing child abuse documents that the police had not been notified, or cases the police had not been notified about. That was the real concern of the police. So I think this story is long from being finished. I hope that answers your question, but yeah, this poor guy that was disfellowshipped, sure, he could be in danger, but at the same time, I think that Watchtower is going to be very careful in going after an individual who did everything possible to expose the fact that there are child abusers in the organization, and further, the fact that the police were never notified. So Watchtower has a lot to lose, if they publicly go after this man.
It sounds like that, like you say, Mark. It's a question of they could charge full at him, but then they'd also be opening themselves up for a world of hurt. So hopefully that will shield that person somewhat.
I will tell you, this person has been interviewed, and I can't really say any more about that, but I will say stay tuned, because we are going to be hearing more in the public eye within the next year about the individual who was responsible for doing this. And
cool.
What remains to be seen, I think we're going to find out within a year. So
we've got just coming in some questions from the chat. One of them is related. Very quick question for Mark. Did Delaware? This is from David Leal, who says, "Did Delaware confidentiality?"
Sorry, what was the question?
This related to the Delaware case. He's just curious to know if Delaware had a statute that allows clergy confidentiality.
Yes. The problem is that Watchtower is trying to use the exception to that, which is the clergy exemption. However, the judge in that case had already ruled that that exception did not apply. So if you take a look at the article on JW's survey, I think from February of 2018, I've got a lot of information in there on that case. In fact, you can read all of this court documents. And he can contact me offline as well, or post something in the comments later, and I'll get him whatever information he needs. But yeah, that was the case with Montana as well. In just about all of these Jehovah's Witness child abuse cases, Watchtower is trying to portray the body of elders as a group of men who are the same as a priest. In fact, the head of Watchtower's legal department, when I ran into him, Phil Brumley, told me that a priest is the same as 3 elders. And if you have confidentiality between a priest and penitent, you should also have the same confidentiality between the judicial body of elders, which they consider to be one priest. So
Well, they're like a trinity or something.
Well, I mean, the body of elders, it could, the judicial committee could be 8 men, it could be 4 men, but it's typically 3, and they believe.
So they're kind of compressing all of the concept of a priest. They're saying, well, you can, like, a judicial committee is essentially a priest, and you could stuff it with 30 elders, but those 30 elders would all count at one priest. That's the way they're trying to spin it. Yeah,
and the worst part is that they're expanding the definition of clergy penitent privilege. Because remember, we had Neil Smith on the show, and I think he explained it very well from the Montana case. What's key here is the fact that elders are attempting to expand the definition of clergy penitent privilege. Normally, clergy privilege is where a person who commits a crime or does something illegal or sinful goes to a priest and says, I need to tell somebody this. I need to repent. I want to get right with God. And so that priest is not normally under any obligation to divulge. Let's say the man stole something, from a local store. Normally, that person is not under any obligation. The priest is not under obligation to pick up the phone and call the police. However, there are exception laws in most states in which if a person reveals child abuse, then the priest is accepted from that law, and he is allowed to pick up the phone and call the police. So it's a really sticky situation when it comes to legal matters and clergy penitent privilege, because Watchtower wants to expand the definition of clergy penitent privilege and expand it to not just the penitent person, but remember, most Jehovah's Witness judicial cases are where the elders go after a person, whether it's a child abuser or someone who has sex, whatever. They go after that person and often will discipline and disfellowship them. And that's not by law considered clergy penitent privilege. That's a group of men going after an individual. And that happened in Delaware, where there were 2 elders specifically who went after a 14-year-old boy and went after the female who had abused him, had sex with him more than 40 or 50 times. And they disfellowship both of them. And then Watchtower wants to claim, that, what was said within the confines of those elders and those 2 people is clergy privilege, so it can't be admitted. The judge did not agree, and he didn't agree in Montana. And this is why Watchtower's losing all these lawsuits.
Cool. I am just going to have to move us along because we're coming up on the half-hour mark and we're still in February. So I'd also like to bring Bethany in, because another thing that happened in February was that Lauren Stewart murdered her husband and 2 children.
Right.
And the dog before turning the gun on herself. Stewart had been disfellowshipped for apostasy and was also a victim of childhood sexual abuse. And it later became apparent that fear or paranoias concerning Armageddon played at least some role in what happened. Beth, you are studying psychology, and I thought you might have some insights on this.
Yeah, the fear, obligation, and guilt from Watchtower, it's so psychologically damaging. I can't imagine that poor woman and what was going through her head. I don't even know what to say. That is so tragic. But and yet I know that there's going to be individuals, indoctrinated witnesses, they're going to look at that and be like, well, that's what she was apostate or she was disfellowshipped. That's what she deserved. That just crazy, unbalanced, unhealthy thinking that you're on the side of wrong. We're right. That completely dichotomous black and white thinking. And to think that the Armageddon teaching was like a loophole for her. Like she could still, am I correct that was, she thought?
Yeah, she felt apparently, she did leave a suicide note. And so reading between the lines, it seems that there was a feeling that she could get her family through Armageddon by ending their lives.
And just anybody who's not familiar with Jehovah's Witnesses doctrine and culture looks at that and says, this is so unhealthy. I just, yeah, that was such a tragic thing. And yeah, and then I remember her neighbor, if I'm correct, a neighbor and a close friend went to the Kingdom Hall and basically crashed the meeting and said, you know, your organization just led this whole family, led her to murder her whole family. She was under intense stress, psychological distress, and it's because of your teachings. And then, of course, a couple of elders came by and took her down and were trying to, you know, shut her up.
Yeah, they actually closed the meeting. That was Joyce Taylor. And
Joyce Taylor, right.
Yeah, she's a psychiatric social worker, which is interesting because it affected her so deeply that, you know, we don't advocate crashing meetings, but, you know, she went in there and she was so, and she brought someone to film it, but she was so affected by what happened. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and just to see the stone cold response and how people are so indoctrinated to shut down and put up a wall. I honestly wonder how many people in the audience, you know, really took to heart what she was saying and would, you know, I mean, it's all speculation. I don't know, but I wonder who went home and looked into this or maybe contacted her afterwards, Joyce Taylor. You know,
yeah, I spoke to her for a good while right after that happened, and she mentioned to me that there were some interesting psychological things that, Bethany, you could probably comment on, but one of them was that Lauren had been affected by what she calls Maslow's theory, the need to feel belonging.
Right.
And that need to feel belonging apparently just affected her deeply because she had been disfellowshipped apparently for apostasy for something like 5 years and was just absolutely brokenhearted over having lost all of her friends. But interestingly enough, she was still not a fully awake ex-member of Jehovah's Witnesses. She still had this, you know, belief in Armageddon, and that did affect her actions.
Right. No, it's amazing the mental hold that those teachings have on people. I know I have relatives personally that were out for 20 years and they still believed it, and they still are just racked with guilt and feel like they're like second-class citizens if they don't come back to the organization. And yeah, that just, Watchtower has absolutely destroyed people's psyches and their sense of value. And I'm not probably articulating it very well, but it is extremely insidious, the damage that Watchtower rhetoric and doctrine causes.
Indeed. Also, I really do. We've got so much to talk about on each issue, but I must move us on. Also in February, it was such a busy month. Osvaldo Padron settled with Watchtower. The Lopez case, I believe, settled as well, Mark. $2 million fine was embedded in the settlement agreement. And I know that because there was the daily fine, wasn't there, which you've kind of recently, I understand, learned a little bit more about how that may have worked out in the end.
Yeah, this is actually something that most of the public don't realize, and something I didn't realize until I dug a little bit deeper into it. Because remember, the court had assigned a $4,000 per day fine against Watchtower for their failure to produce the documents that were demanded. And these were child abuse documents from inside the organization that would have contributed to the case for the plaintiffs, Osvaldo Padron and Lopez. And so because of their being what the court called recalcitrant litigants, they were issued a fine for well over a year, and that had amassed something like well over $2.5 million in fines. And so what had happened was a year ago in January of 2018, when Padron and then Lopez settled with Watchtower for an undisclosed amount, which obviously we don't have access to the settlement agreement. But what I found out just recently was that the fine itself was not payable to the state of California or to the court. That $4,000 per day fine was actually payable to the plaintiffs. So that's the reason why we can't separate those two amounts. Whatever the punitive damages that were ultimately assessed for the plaintiffs on behalf of Lopez and Padron, plus this fine. All of that ended up being wrapped up inside this agreement. So, one can only imagine how much money was involved there, because we don't know if they reduced the fine. They could have reduced it by half or 3/4, but not likely. They likely retained a good portion of that fine and added on to it, monies that were agreed upon between Watchtower and the plaintiffs to make this all go away. Because you got to remember, this case has gone on for years and years, and Watchtower is paying an absolute fortune, not only in flying their attorneys around the country, like attorney Joel Taylor and John Miller and others. They're flying them all over the place in fighting these, but they're paying an enormous amount of money to law firms in California and Pennsylvania and many other states, including Montana. They paid a fortune to have a non-JW law firm defend them in these civil cases. So I don't think people realize just how much money Watchtower is spending out of contributed funds in order to defend themselves against these indefensible child abuse cases. So the bottom line is that $2 million plus fine was incorporated in the final non-disclosure agreement with Padron and Lopez.
Thank you. It's good to have some degree of closure on that, because I know a few people were wondering what happened to that daily fine. I also want to, sorry, go on, Javier.
No, I was just going to crack a little joke, but I was going to say that recalcitrant is my personal buzzword for 2018. I have sought out every opportunity to use that word.
Indeed. And
I mean, how cool is it that the court called Watchtower a recalcitrant litigant?
Yeah,
everyone's scrambling to their dictionaries right now.
Everyone's Googling that word right now. Trust me.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty good.
It's in the court
pretty
document,
accurate
too.
description.
Well, while we're on you, Javier, 2018 was also a pretty big year for films, and you're a film producer. By the way, if anyone's wondering what's happening with the Super Chat, there's been some amazing donations so far, which I really must thank you all for. Again, if you're just joining us, we are donating all Super Chat proceeds to the production of The Truth About the Truth. Javier, 2018 was a massive year for films related to JWs. It was, I think, in 2017 that Apostasy was premiered, but it was certainly in 2018 when it got a lot of attention and a lot of awards and that kind of thing. And we also saw in 2018 the release of Tony Duchesne's film adaptation of his novel Confessions of a Teenage Jesus Jerk. What are your thoughts on Jehovah's Witnesses making? Oh, and the Children Act as well with Emma Thompson. Is this something new? It feels like something new.
I think it's evidence that there is a market for these kinds of films, that people are interested in these kinds of themes. But in particular, the film Apostasy, not just because I can relate to the subject matter, but I thought it was a really good film. It was really well done. And some people, just reading the comments and the reviews, they were like, oh, well, it presents the life of a JW as such, so dull and so boring, and the characters were a little bit deadpan, and it's like, no, he captured what it really is like to live those experiences. And then I mean, me personally as a screenwriter, I thought it was very well written. It had all the detail that created a real life world, and then there were payoffs to everything that he set up in the beginning of that story towards the end. And I don't want to reveal too much in case people haven't watched it, and I don't want to do any spoilers, but it's a really great film. It captures what it's like to be a Jehovah's Witness very authentically. And yeah, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. And yeah, I think there's proof that there will be more content like this going forward. And when it does come out, it's important for us to go out and support it.
Indeed. No,
Yeah, there's actually some nice comments coming through in the chat about that. Humbles19 says that they love the Tony Duchesne movie. Jim B says Apostasy was awesome, really hit the mark for me. Annette Black also, Apostasy movie was top notch, loved it. Monica Owens, Apostasy was absolutely incredible. I agree. I think generally there seems to be a sentiment. I mean, obviously from the film community, because Apostasy's got 5-star reviews and it's winning awards, but also from the XJW community, there seems to be a real sense that that film just nailed it.
Indeed. Well done for squeezing through a few live chats, questions and comments there. Well done, Covert. And yeah, if you have any other comments or questions, Covert is keeping his beady eye on the live chat.
I am, and I'll just add, there are people asking questions about the Leah Remini special and also the Australian Royal Commission. I'm making a note of them all, and I think probably we'll discuss them when we get to those bits later in the year. But keep the questions coming, guys.
Absolutely. So into March, we really are struck. There's so much to talk about. Into March, early in March, Crisis of Conscience was finally released on Amazon after being out of print for years. March 8th, the Guardian newspaper released an article asking for JW abuse victims to come forward. I believe they had about 100 stories come forward as a result of making that request. And also in March, we had the W5 No Witnesses documentary aired in Canada. So a few events there in March. Who wants to get stuck into that?
So I'll grab the Crisis of Conscience one, because I think that is amazing, because obviously the Crisis of Conscience is, for those who don't know, who are listening, it was written by a former governing body member, Raymond Franz, who ultimately he ended up leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses because he just couldn't. It's interesting, if you read through the book, although he obviously had some doctrinal disagreements with Watchtower, the linchpin was he just couldn't stand the way the unloving and unkind way that the Watchtower organization was treating Jehovah's Witnesses, and that seems to be one of the major things that drove him away from that organization. And that's his autobiography is kind of, for me, it was one of a seminal part of my waking up. It really played a key role in helping me understand. Javier's holding up his copy.
Excellent, yeah.
Me understand. Basically, a lot of the stuff that Raymond Franz was saying, I was like, yeah, I've seen that stuff happening as well, and I felt just as uncomfortable as he did. Now, for a while, the book was quite hard to get hold of because it obviously sells out. Whenever it's published, it sells out because lots of Jehovah's Witnesses want to get hold of it. But it was republished again in that month of March. So if you're an ex-Jehovah's Witness and you haven't read that book, I can't recommend it highly enough, especially if you are still slightly physically, if you're slightly physically out, mentally in, if you've still got some lingering doubts that this might be God's true organization, go and get that book. And it will, it's really is an insight into what the governing body really is.
Indeed.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And, regardless of whether a person leaves the JW organization and winds up still having faith in God or not having faith in God, we're not here to direct a person's faith. But what I like about Crisis of Conscience is the fact that a person who is in the process of waking up can read that and realize that Ray Franz was not a person who was trying to speak out against God or religion itself. He was speaking out against organized religion and how that had affected his life and the life of millions of Jehovah's Witnesses, because he discusses some really critical things such as the blood policy and its effect on so many tens of thousands of people, and also what happened in Malawi. That's something that was covered very well in the Confessions of a Teenage Jesus Jerk movie, where these young men read Crisis of Conscience and realized there was a real conflict going on, because Watchtower was responsible for the death of thousands in Malawi because of their policies. So, yeah, very highly recommended.
I can't tell you how eye-opening that book is for people, especially I've had the opportunity to gift it to people who left the organization decades ago, but they still held on to these beliefs, or there were a lot of things they didn't know about. And when I speak to them after they've read the book, there's so many conversations I've had with people. It's unbelievable. So if sometimes it's the easiest and the first material that people are willing to read when they're finally ready to look at something that's critical of Watchtower. But Franz had a very I never met him personally, of course, but if his book reads the way that he was, he seemed like a very soft-spoken person who appealed to reason, and that's usually what allows people to give themselves permission to read something like this. So I highly recommend it for sure.
Beth, you woke up fairly recently. Did crisis of conscience play any role in your exit from the organization?
It did. I'll be honest, I didn't read it completely through because I was reading so much at the time. But yeah, it was definitely, you can't unsee what you've seen when you read that. I got about halfway through and kind of would skim. It's a large read, but yeah, that, I mean, who better than a governing body member to, like, we're not making this stuff up, you know? So yeah, crisis of conscience was instrumental in my waking up process. It confirmed and validated things that I was already suspicious of or had concerns over. And I thought he would know.
Indeed.
You know, so yeah, no, excellent read.
Was there anything that stood out in your mind as being really a bright light that shone upon your doubts in the organization?
You know, this is probably going to sound trite or no, like not a big deal. Everything was just so on point. But the thing that really got me, and I'm probably not remembering everything at the moment, but he said that there was in the beginning of the book, when he was talking about disfellowshipping offenses, what sexual acts were appropriate between married couples, and how there was just an influx of mail, thousands of letters. Well, I did this with my husband, or I did this with my wife. Are we good with God? That just, I mean, it's surprising and not surprising how the absolute hubris or presumptuousness or nerve to think you can regulate and have any say between a married couple, that just blew my mind, among other things. But just the level of control is so insidious in every aspect of a person's life. I think that's just such an intimate, private thing that how dare you have like a tribunal kind of, you know, governing body situation where we're going to tell people, well, you're kicked out and shunned by your family because you did this thing that nobody should ever know about.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating that as witnesses, they can't go to the Bible and get an answer themselves
Right.
for some question. They have to write in to the governing body or pick up a Watchtower and read it to find out if something is appropriate or inappropriate.
They've completely subjugated. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's go ahead. That's right. The psychology of it all really was awakening for me.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, they have completely subjugated their critical thinking skills and their conscience to men who put on their underwear the same way you do. You know, it's just
nobody puts on their underwear the way Mark puts on his underwear, I'm afraid.
Probably not a very professional way of putting that, but
there's a joke in there somewhere, but I'm gonna leave it on the table.
that was just one of those things that just,
why are you leaving your underwear on the table?
Guys, we must press on. I'm determined to get us to the middle of the year before the hour mark hits us. So in May, on May 25th, GDPR went into effect in Europe. We did a Watchtower in Focus episode discussing that, as well as the publisher ID development, which basically was Watchtower's new digital system to make sure all publishers are digitized in their records, which isn't remotely creepy for a cult to be doing. And on May 29th, we had a special episode of Cults and Extreme Belief with Elizabeth Vargas, Jehovah's Witnesses, which featured Romy Maple and Barbara Anderson. A huge exposure for the abuse that's going on in Jehovah's Witnesses. Then the next month in June, we had the leaking of a hilarious attendant training video showing an evil apostate sneaking onto the stage and being manhandled or approached by an intimidating lineup of attendants. Also, we had confidential budget videos leaked, which it's actually turned. We did a fascinating Watchtower in Focus, which got a lot of views, incidentally, because we went over the fact that there were certain details there, such as the fact that I think it was for 2017 or 2016, Watchtower only had a $25 million contingency fund. Some fascinating details came out of that particular leak, which we were able to analyze. And on June 12th, Pennsylvania Representative Mark Rodsey invited Jehovah's Witnesses to join him in the quest to revise Pennsylvania's statute of limitations restrictions on the reporting of child sex abuse. Before I turn over to the panel, I just want to thank everybody who is inundating us with questions. We currently have nearly 500 watching live. And we have some very kind and generous donations, which, as I mentioned before, are all being forwarded on to the production of About the Truth. So, guys, we had some fascinating developments. We had GDPR and publisher ID. We had some kick-ass exposure on A&E with cults and extreme belief. We had the attendant training video. We had the leaked budget videos. What do you think really stood out for you there?
I think for me, and kudos to you guys for taking that budget video and making that interesting, because that was some tough material to work with there, man. I mean,
you should have seen the raw footage.
But excuse me. But I think aside from that revelation this year, I don't want to get ahead of you there, Lloyd, but we've learned a lot about Watchtower's finances, and that was one of the videos that kind of revealed that things were a little more dire than what we thought. But we also learned what their worth is, at least in the continental United States, from what I understand, right? In the U.S., what the branch might be worth, and that's going to be very revealing going forward, I think, with all the lawsuits that might be in the pipeline, the content that's being put out there, right? When we can say, Jehovah's Witnesses are not just the people who come and knock on your door on Saturday mornings, and we talked about this before in other episodes, but they're not just a punchline to a joke, right? Like we said before, when we can describe them as a multi-million and into the billion-dollar corporation, that kind of gives you a whole new perspective of what we're dealing with. It's not just people. There is a big corporation behind it. There's a big entity that makes the rules, that enforces the rules, and that I think that's going to become more crucial as they get scrutinized more and more.
Indeed.
Yeah, great point. And I wanted to give a shout out to those documentaries. We never got back to the W5 documentary from Canada, but I will say anybody that wants to Google that one or the other one that we just mentioned, go ahead and do that. You can find a lot of clips or even the full thing on YouTube. The W5 Canada documentary was interesting because that is the equivalent of 60 Minutes here in the United States, where I'm located. So it was a major production that was seen by millions of viewers across Canada. So, well done to the journalists who covered that story and raised a lot of questions about how Watchtower treats abuse victims. But one of the biggest stories I think that you mentioned, Lloyd, in the month of May was the GDPR. I think it was May 25th, where in the European Union, the GDPR laws went into effect, in which privacy became a major issue. And Watchtower could no longer just keep the lists of people's names and their address and phone number and all this other private information without getting the consent from individual Jehovah's Witnesses. So prior to May the 25th, Watchtower had to, in every country of the EU, the European Union, Watchtower had to issue consent forms. So every Jehovah's Witness had to sign that form so that Watchtower could retain their data. And if they didn't sign the form, there were consequences, and those consequences were mentioned in another letter that was given to the bodies of elders. And it would be things like, you can't even have your name on the bulletin board or hold a position in the congregation if you didn't sign this consent agreement. So it really raises the question of, is this a religion that is good and beneficial for the people, or is it an organization which simply retains data and is a publishing corporation? And Watchtower is under a lot of scrutiny right now, because even though active witnesses mostly sign that form, those who are no longer Jehovah's Witnesses are writing into JW Survey and writing into the government saying, we object to you're having our information, because even though they don't sign that consent form, Watchtower still retains the S77 disfellowshipping form of anyone that they disfellowship, not only here in the United States, but in all of the EU. And they are claiming that they have a right to permanently retain that data, even though GDPR says they cannot. So Watchtower is arguing that they do have a right to do that, to retain a person's name and congregation status as a disfellowship person, so that they can use it against them in the congregation to retain their congregational authority. Because once that goes out the window and they can't retain that person's information, then that person really is no longer should be a victim of shunning, because there's nothing in writing that says that person is disfellowship. So we can talk more.
This was in Europe, right? This was just in Europe.
In the European Union, which is a whole series of countries that would include, obviously, we know that I think the United Kingdom is in the process of leaving because of Brexit, but it would include all of those EU countries from Spain to Ireland and so forth.
So it's probably going to keep developing. I think this GDPR issue is going to this isn't over. It started in 2018, but as you say, Mark, it's clear that Watchtower either doesn't understand GDPR or is just deciding how they want to apply it. It's how they want to apply it, and that's not how the EU says to apply it. So I think it's possible in 2019 this whole story could get very interesting if people keep. I mean, the key is that ex-JWs or JWs who are leaving will have to keep going directly to the regulators and tell them what's going on. But if they keep doing that, this could go to some very interesting places.
Indeed.
And remember, you're just a number. Watchtower assigns you a publisher ID number, which is the whole point of that episode we did on publisher ID. And as a number, they retain that information on you until long after you're dead. Do they have the right to do that anywhere in the world? Well, that's a question that we're raising.
Indeed, especially in the modern age when people are understandably increasingly wary of how their personal information is used. And the whole GDPR thing was just a mess, because they were essentially threatening people with no longer being used in certain ways by the organization if they didn't cooperate, when we looked at the paperwork, as I recall. So, some big questions to be asked there. Speaking of questions, Covert, is there anything coming through on the live chat that we can get our team?
So we have a few. So I'm saving the Royal Commission ones and the Leah Remini ones for when we discuss it. One quick question. This is a question for everyone. Since this is from Blakaliunga. I'm sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Since the organization seems to be struggling with many lawsuits and scandals, could it survive much longer? The religion will live, but what about the org? I'll quickly give my answer to that, which is I don't know. I suspect it will be here for a while, because the religion will probably be around for a very long time. The organization, personally, I think will probably be around for a bit. But I think we'll start to see it decay, and I think it'll become like Scientology, whereby Scientology still exists, but it's an absolutely toxic brand label. And the only reason Scientology is going is because it has, reserves and real estate, and it's not recruiting anyone else really. And I think we're seeing the same thing with Watchtower over the next decade or so. It will quickly become like Scientology. I don't think it'll collapse, but I think it'll shrink down and become something that we don't recognize. How long that'll take, I don't know, but that's just my own personal opinion on it.
Beth, do you see Watchtower continuing in a prosperous fashion moving forward?
No, absolutely not. I share Covert's sentiments on that. I think it's going to be that. I don't mean to sound, what's the word? I think it's just going to be that funny group that people, oh, remember the witnesses? They used to go door to door, just like he said, Scientology. It's going to go the way of Scientology. I feel the same way. It's going to have it doesn't have any real relevance now to the larger world. They think they're at the pinnacle, of everything that's going on, of world events. They're at the center, when in reality, most people don't care about them. So I think that's just going to get worse.
I try to remember that ideas and religions are very hard to kill off. And as evidence of that, we have the fact that there are still Bible students, there are still Russellites in 2018, almost 2019. So even though Charles Taze Russell was, had such crazy ideas. So I fully expect Jehovah's Witnesses, or people who identify as following the quote unquote faithful and discreet slaves, to be around for quite possibly centuries to come. But when it comes to the actual legal affair, the legal entities of Watchtower, there are some questions there when it comes particularly to finances. If an organization can go into debt, it's at risk of being bankrupt at some point. So it will be interesting to see whether the organization can downscale and downsize the way Covert says rapidly enough over the coming years.
Right.
Yeah. So I think they're going to be around for a while, and as long as witnesses are giving money to the organization, they will exist in one form or another. So really, it is a organization based on the availability of funds, because that's what generates the money to run their website, to operate their buildings, produce literature. But I think the important thing for most of us is not so much to hope or think that they're going to disappear, because they're not going to disappear anytime soon. But we want to neutralize the effects of the organization on people's lives. Shunning, that's a killer. The blood policy, the things that we talk about in the Truth About the Truth documentary, if we can neutralize, to help people wake up and realize that everyone is free to believe whatever they want. Petting pandas in paradise, that's fine. You can believe that. But, you cannot have this continued ongoing effect on the lives of people who've lost family members due to the blood policy, or are being shunned by their brother, sister, mother, father, aunts and uncles, and so forth. So that's what I think sums up our goals in raising awareness and waking people up to the realities of religions, not just Jehovah's Witnesses, but others.
I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate on this one. And I'm going to say that I think the growth is going to shift to countries like in Central and South America. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Mexico is the second largest country with a population of Jehovah's Witnesses. I imagine that as these court cases and these shows and the content and all these productions become more numerous, that the growth is going to start to stagnate even more than it is now, and maybe even decline in countries like the US and most European countries. And that growth is going to shift to African and South American countries that are still very, very religious. They're still working out their internet access, right? In some of those countries is very poor. So I think that's what's going to happen. And then here in the United States, I think for Watchtower to continue to exist as the entity that it is today, it's going to get much, much tougher to do. Like right now, all of the cases in the courts have to do with child sexual abuse. But I think once some of those get through and there's more wins with Zalkin and like the case in Montana and things like that, we might start to see more criminal cases come through that are within statutes of limitations, because people are going to be more aware and they're going to be more inclined to report. And I think we might start to see court cases tied to some of the other issues on the blood transfusions and the shunning. And so once you're fighting, wars on those multiple fronts, the organization is either going to have to change or it's going to have to cease to exist as it does currently. So in whatever form that takes place, that's going to be a good thing. If there's change and they lose some of these battles and it forces them to change and remove some of these harmful policies, it would be a good thing. But I don't think they're going to go away as a religion, at least not in my lifetime.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
Thanks for your answers, guys. So there's a couple of other quick things from the chat. JF Nielsen says there's a huge article in print tomorrow in Norway regarding GDPR and the JWs. It's a full front page thing, and it has 8 full pages inside, and it's also got an interview with Jason Wynn, formerly of Avoid JW. So that's relevant to the GDPR chat. And everybody likes your dog, Javier. There's been a little dog walking around the background. People want to pet your dog. They think he's cute. He's the current star of the chat. So,
well, Mark's cat needs to up its game then, because so far the dogs are winning. So,
I think you might be able to see him in the background. And I'm going to let's see. We have the live chat. I do have the website. So for those who are actually, let's see if I can type this in here. For those that are on the chat right now, I just posted a link to the website. It's fvn.no, and that'll take you directly to the Norwegian article, which features Jason Wynn. I think it's a 6 or 7 page major article about his work with Avoid JW. You're going to have to hit the Google Translate if you don't speak Norwegian, but it's they actually flew to Norway a few weeks ago. I'm sorry, they flew from Norway to Ireland a few weeks ago to interview Jason. So I look forward to seeing that article.
Mark, if you could get me that link, I'll make sure it's in the video description for anyone following along later.
Indeed.
Although there are currently, let's see what the latest numbers are, over 500 watching, which is just amazing. So thanks to all of you for tuning in on a Sunday, no less. I'm going to try and surge us forward in time a little bit more from June through to September. So in July, the Summer Assembly series caused uproar in a few European countries, including Sweden, where Jehovah's Witnesses were placed under scrutiny for featuring propaganda videos to large audiences, which included children. Anti-LGBTQ and Armageddon imagery were cited as prime concerns. We've already mentioned the release of Apostasy that received its UK release also in July. August was a quite quiet month. We haven't really remembered anything from August. But in September, there was, I think, Montana, and there was the, I think the annual general meeting was the next month, wasn't it, in October? We'll come to that. And on September 9th, we've already mentioned the Children Act that received its international premiere. I'm going to be completely honest. I've heard negative stuff about the Children Act insofar as Jehovah's Witnesses are portrayed. So I haven't been chomping at the bit to watch that. I still haven't watched it. In fact, I will watch it at some point. But there's a lot to talk about just there. You've got Montana, you've got the way European countries are dealing with propaganda films that are shown to children. So much to talk about there.
I've heard about Montana. And will say that I have seen the Children Act, and it's very interesting. Of course, it was quite interesting for Jehovah's Witnesses to be featured in this Children Act book that was turned into a screenplay by Emma Thompson and Stanley Tucci, two just stellar actors. But it really dealt with this 17-year-old minor who needed a blood transfusion because of leukemia. And, you know, I don't know in the end what kind of reviews are going to be out for this movie. I know there's some negative, some very positive. There were some very accurate things portrayed in this movie, particularly about the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses are considered as disassociated, not disfellowshipped, when they accept a blood transfusion voluntarily. So that was a very interesting scene in the movie where, you know, that distinction was made. And of course, the end result is still the same. A person would be shunned for forever unless they were reinstated after having accepted a life-saving blood transfusion. But it really hit home for me because, you know, I've lost many friends due to the blood policy, and one was a young woman in her 20s who I grew up with, who got leukemia. And the next thing I know, she's going off to this hospital in New Jersey, which turns out is one of those hospitals, I think it's Englewood, which specializes in the treatment of, they have a wing dedicated to the treatment of Jehovah's Witnesses or patients who do not wish to accept blood. And, you know, what she needed was a blood transfusion. You know, this is one of the most young, vibrant, wonderful persons, you know, that I grew up with as a child. And in her mid-20s, she was just, you know, cut down by this disease and had no chance to survive. She died because of Watchtower's blood policy. And, you know, I'm not going to give a spoiler for the Children Act to tell you what happened in the end of the movie, but suffice it to say that, you know, this young man had leukemia, and they picked the right subject matter related to blood to describe this. But I think there's also a level of empathy that you feel for Emma Thompson's character, because she's the family court judge that is tasked with making this decision on whether or not this young man at that moment in the trial or in the case was to receive a blood transfusion, because he was still a minor.
So Mark, you rate the film, do you? Because I've had mixed reactions to it from XJWs, but you think it's worth going to see?
Yeah, I definitely do. Just to see Stanley Tucci and Emma Thompson and the subject matter itself. I think my personal opinion is that I didn't like the second half and the plot twist that occurred in that movie. And I won't give any spoilers about it, but that's just my opinion on the way they took the story. But I think the subject matter is really important. So,
is it on Amazon, Mark? Where did you watch it? Did you just buy it?
Oh boy, you know, wow, someone. I have a Plex
Mark
account.
Watched it illegally.
Someone had it on their Plex account, and I watched it there. So I don't know.
Naughty.
I have no. Honestly, the answer is I have no idea. This person may have purchased it and just put it on his Plex account, which is a legal way to watch movie. A very legal way to watch. Very
legal. Just to clear up any confusion now, it was watched very legally.
Well, I'm sure our viewers, we've got almost 500 now watching. Someone out there can tell us. XJW Analyzer just said it's available on Amazon Prime. So there we go.
There we go. So,
hey, Lloyd, if I may, real quick, because we kind of blew past June, and I just wanted to. I mean, it's a little bit of a shout out with Dr. Michael Lill from Cedars-Sinai. I think you and I have spoken about it before. He was a doctor, an Australian doctor who worked out here in Los Angeles, and he specialized in bloodless bone marrow surgery for Jehovah's Witnesses. And he passed away in June. So I had the opportunity to speak with this guy for a couple hours on the phone, and we were scheduled to interview him for the documentary, but unfortunately he had been battling cancer for several years, and he passed back in June. But he was very vocal about his disagreement with Watchtower's policy. But he was also very willing to work with Jehovah's Witnesses, and he saved many, many, many Jehovah's Witness lives. So I just wanted to make sure, we remembered him for the work that he did. Oddly enough, he's an atheist. He was an atheist. And that was kind of one of the funny things about him, that he didn't believe in any of the religious standings, but he was willing to work with Jehovah's Witnesses, and he saved lives. But he was also very critical of the policy. So our condolences to his family, and I just want to make sure he was remembered for all the fantastic work he did throughout his life.
Yeah, it's good that we can remember him, and also a reminder that there are quote unquote worldly people who are looking out for Jehovah's Witnesses and trying to keep them alive as much as they can. And it's tragic that we weren't able to hear his story for the documentary.
Yeah,
but we are looking to explore the blood issue, the blood translation, the blood transfusion issue as much as possible. We've already interviewed a few people, haven't we, on that subject? So
yeah.
Indeed. So we're on the home stretch now through to October, December. Incidentally, just before I power on, Covert, you mentioned that there's been questions about the Australian Royal Commission.
Yes.
I'm a little bit confused because that was a couple of years ago.
So what's been going on, and this is an example of how packed 2018 has been and how hard it's been to keep up to it. The Australian government recently announced, and with the Australian Royal Commission, that they may potentially start to name and shame organisations that have yet to join the National Compensation
So this
Scheme.
is new news.
This is relative. This was about, I think this was in November that this came out.
Right.
And because there's so much stuff going on, I mean, I think I tweeted it and I think you did as well, but we didn't get to do much with it. Now, there's a lot of questions about that saying, do you think the JWs will ever join the redress scheme in Australia? And so I'm wondering what people think about that. Personally, I think if they are legally forced to, and if it might cost them more money not to than to join it, I think you might get them to join it, but there's no way they'll join it voluntarily, even if they get named and shamed.
Well, they should, shouldn't they? And it says a lot about the organisation that they haven't jumped at the opportunity to show some humanity and some accountability and some responsibility by signing up for it. But yeah, I agree. Unfortunately, the organisation that I know of would have to be dragged kicking and screaming into that sort of arrangement.
I mean, in the conversation we had with Neil Smith, I remember we described Watchtower just making the phone call, just instructing the elders to make the phone call when child sexual abuse is reported is almost literally multi-million-dollar phone call. And if they're not willing to make a multi-million-dollar phone call just to protect themselves from liability, I doubt they would voluntarily join the redress scheme. So, I mean, it just goes to show you the extent that they're willing to go to fight these things. It's unbelievable.
But we will be vigilant on that, viewers. And if there are further developments along those lines, and as we mentioned before, we will be hopefully in Australia at some point over 2019. So maybe it will coincide with that. We don't know yet, but we will keep an eye on that side of things. Moving into October, we had the annual general meeting, which I understand will soon be shown on JW Broadcasting. At that annual general meeting, a new book was released with some quote unquote, I'm just reading off my notes, interesting artwork. 1914 and 1919 were doubled down on. You would think they would be distancing themselves as much as possible from that preposterous theology, but no, they are buying into it wholesale. On October 16th was the 75th anniversary of West Virginia versus Barnett. I'm reading VA, and as a Brit, I have to try and remember what state that is. A landmark US Supreme Court ruling on the matter of Jehovah's Witnesses being required to salute the flag. And Watchtower Legal Counsel Phil Brumley delivered a keynote address and didn't know after his address that he was speaking to our very own Mark O'Donnell and sharing some unfortunate insights on future legal litigation and appeals. And then in November, we had the Leah Remini's Scientology and the Aftermath Jehovah's Witnesses special. After a significant outcry and outreach of former Jehovah's Witnesses to Leah Remini and A&E, November saw the release of a 2-hour special which exposed the practices of Jehovah's Witnesses. Taking us right through into December, we will talk about that, but taking us right through into this month, December, we received news of Dutch raids that had taken place. The previous month, we had the class action lawsuit unveiled in Canada, and we also saw a California court uphold a $4 million fine for Watchtower's non-disclosure in a child sex abuse lawsuit, I believe. So some big talking points there, guys.
Wow. I just want I get the giggles every time I hear the story of Mark and that West Virginia thing and him talking. All of us have met Mark personally, and we know he's the nicest guy in the world, and he portrays that in person. So I totally get why it was easy for was it Brumley? Was his name?
Bill Brumley, yeah.
Yeah, to just open up on certain things and talk about things freely. But it's just ironic that it's like it's Mark there and he's talking to this guy and what he's telling him is
one
just...
of the last people who he should be divulging legal information to. He's divulging to. So
I like to
found the leak. We found the source of the leak.
I like to pretend that Mark turned around after that conversation and did this with his hands.
Yeah, it was interesting, and that's one of the reasons why we are very much interested in helping people that are still inside the organization. We're not angry apostates. I walked into that, it was in upstate New York where the 75th anniversary took place. And it was packed with witnesses. And 5 minutes in, I was instantly recognized. Someone came up to me and I thought, oh my goodness, they know me as John Redwood, or they've seen me on the Cedars channel or something like that. But actually it was an elder who works for the Office of Public Information for Watchtower who knew me as Mark. And he came up to me, and then his wife saw me, and I go way back with his wife, and she gave me a big hug. And the next thing you know, I'm just, surrounded. They're introducing me to other guys from the Office of Public Information. And then Phil Brumley's there, and he gives his speech, which was, just, a big propaganda piece for Watchtower. But it was an interesting experience because they didn't know, why I went there. But Jehovah's Witnesses, the one thing that they're very proud of is the fact that they fought for the rights of their own people to not have to stand and salute the flag. And a lot of people give credit to Jehovah's Witnesses for doing that. My take on it is that I think another group would have done it if Jehovah's Witnesses hadn't done it. I think Jehovah's Witnesses just happened to be, they were the ones who were pushing the flag salute issue to the very limit. I can't imagine that in the year 2018, we would still have people being thrown in jail or, students who are being, expelled for not saluting the flag. So things would have changed. But Jehovah's Witnesses and the famous Hayden Covington, who was also an attorney for Muhammad Ali, was the guy who fought all these Supreme Court battles. And Philip Brumley used that opportunity, the 75th anniversary, to feature Jehovah's Witnesses and the work that they've done legally to establish, these rights. And Brumley's point in all of this was that, look at what Jehovah's Witnesses have done for you. And yet, I looked at him thinking, my God, and you guys were there live when this was all going on. I was communicating with you guys, and I could only think, how deluded are you to think that you've really helped the public, but that you prevent the reporting of child abuse to the authorities, on the basis of, your twisted legal understanding of clergy privilege and so forth. It really shows that Jehovah's Witnesses are under a delusion, and we need to help them get the factual information out there. And we could talk about this longer, but I thought it was worth mentioning that event was very interesting, because one thing Brumley did was he showed a film, which I think we've seen a lot of this before, but he showed a film of all of these clips of how Jehovah's Witnesses are being mistreated in the world. In Russia, they showed the police storming the kingdom halls and planting evidence and doing all of these things. And he really was trying to get sympathy for Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think most of us don't want to see Jehovah's Witnesses thrown in jail, but we do want to see the organization held accountable for their policies.
Well, what was interesting about that too, Mark, was it also shows the lengths they're willing to work with, secular organizations, because that was a whole presentation, right? They put on a play, they showed videos, it went on for a full day. They're willing to talk to the press and to the public when the coverage is positive for them, right? But they don't answer our requests for interviews or anything like that. But the minute you can portray them in a positive light, you can spin it in a positive way, they're all over it. They're willing to work with worldly organizations, with all sorts of government agencies and private charities and all that stuff, as long as they're shown in a good light. And
good point.
People need to see that. So
interesting as well that they kind of played on the persecution in Russia. That's been kind of like a narrative that's kind of been going on now for the last couple of years in the propaganda that's released by Jehovah's Witnesses. And we saw that again in the new prophecy book that was released at the annual meeting, where you even had artwork showing like a situation room at the White House or somewhere with a TV screen showing Warwick and Samuel Hurd and, you know, the government monitoring Jehovah's Witnesses. Beth, do you sense that there's been a real ramping up of the whole kind of persecution complex stroke paranoia?
Yes, but I think that's because they're trying to stop the bleeding. I think that I'd like to hear everybody else's thoughts on this, but just like 75 was a complete bust, and then 81 came the shunning policy. It was enforced, and there's these waves of when people start leaving, then they start ramping it up again. And I've watched other documentaries and read other things about different cults and high control groups, and the pattern is exactly the same. Whenever they sense, you know, things are not going well and people are leaving and getting hip to them, they start ramping up that persecution complex again. It's really not a unique tactic. Everybody else, every other high control group and cult is doing that. But yeah, absolutely. I thought that was a very disturbing photo, Lloyd, in that book with the control room. First of all, disturbing, but also funny. Like, you really think you're at the center of everyone's universe.
Yeah. Watchtower is the new Osama bin Laden to the American government, apparently.
That's what that painting reminded me of, right? Was that situation room when on the night that they killed bin Laden?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's true what you said, Bethany. The organization is old enough now where you can see it's sort of like a cycle now, right? There's precedent that this is what happens when people start to leave, or that there's a lot of critical attention given to the organization, that they'll kind of double down and harden their stance on certain things. And 100 years later, we've seen that more than several times.
Right.
So yeah, there's a pattern indeed.
Yeah, they can't run away from the internet's cracking everything open, and you can't tell kids, 19-year-old kids, don't get on YouTube. Don't look at before, when I was growing up, it was, apostates maybe had books, or, they were outside the convention picketing. But now there's so much information, and it's not angry apostates. It's just the facts. It's the truth. It's just laid out. Just enough time has passed. You can't tell people to stay off the internet, and it's, biting them in the butt. And, and so I just feel the persecution complex is just getting worse because
it's like
of that.
In Tony DeShane's movie, that little scene where I think they're gathered like in a cafeteria table, and somebody pulls out the Crisis of Conscience book, and they're like, it's like a smuggled contraband kind of thing. And now it's it's in your phone. Everyone will see it. So.
Exactly.
So, Kova, you mentioned that there were some questions about the Aftermath show.
Yeah, because obviously, I think, especially since people who were watching it were very aware of like the way Scientology reacted to Leah Remini's shows when she was discussing Scientology. There's a question from Monica Owens. A huge highlight this year was the Leah Remini special. Has there been any communication to any of the participants from Watchtower that you know of? So in other words, any of the people who were involved in that special, has Watchtower contacted them?
Haven't contacted me. I haven't heard of any of the other participants being contacted by Watchtower, to be honest. That will be interesting, actually, to kind of follow up on that. Not necessarily, I'm not expecting Watchtower necessarily to contact the participants, but it'll be interesting to know what, if any, fallout there has been with believing family members of the participants since they were on the show. I haven't heard anything really from my family and people who knew me when I was a JW after telling my story, but who knows, it may be a bit different for some of the other participants, so maybe that's a good subject for maybe a future episode.
I'm sure they're fair gaming Lloyd and Mark right now, and they're probably collecting your trash. as we speak.
I must be next time the Croatian bin lorry comes past, I'm gonna close scrutiny to who's driving it.
Have there been any legal threats?
Oh, legal threats.
Yeah, has there been any legal threat to anyone? That's from Sasha D'Souza.
Not that I'm aware of, Sasha. No.
Well, that's actually a good, maybe not following the Leah Remini show, but it's a good time to mention the fact that Watchtower has gone after all of the websites, all of the key websites, including JW Survey, as I believe in January this year. Avoid JW.
Well, I haven't really talked about that yet, but yeah, they have gone. Yeah, they have gone after activists. We can say, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll just leave it at that and know that the Watchtower's legal department is very much aware of the apostate websites and just the fact that the information is out there. They're even going so far as to chasing down individuals who just have published fair use images from their publications without even misrepresenting them, just publishing the images. I'll leave it at that for now, but yeah, they're very concerned. And I think the biggest concern is the fact that they know, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in a few minutes, that their numbers in certain areas are really dropping. And I think they want to stem the losses they're experiencing.
Indeed. Before we move
information control. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Before we move on to that, actually, Mark, if we could stay on you, because I just want you to explain a little bit to our viewers. We haven't yet covered the class action lawsuit in Canada. Maybe you could let us know where that's up to, and also let us know what you know about the California courts upholding the $4 million fine.
Well, I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. There's actually a couple of class action suits that are in process in Canada. The big one we've heard about is the $66 million class action lawsuit. And the way it works in Canada with class action lawsuits is that they need to be certified by the court before they are allowed to proceed. And that's what happened just recently in December. There was a hearing in which Watchtower's attorneys from Canada and the US, including Joel Taylor, showed up, not as a lead counsel, but he showed up, I think, to assist. He was from the Montana trial. And they were there in order to plead their case as to why this class action suit should not go forward. And the plaintiffs obviously were there to plead their case why it should go forward. So what's happened was that a few weeks back, that case was heard before the magistrates in Canada. And I think it's going to take 1 or 2 months at least before we're going to get a final answer on whether the Canadian judicial system will permit that case to move forward. So we really don't have an answer, but at this point, but we do know that there are a lot of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, or who knows, maybe some of them are current Jehovah's Witnesses that are filing along with this class action case in Canada, who've been seriously harmed by the fact that Watchtower's policy prevented their protection and prevented the police from knowing about the abusers. Many of these abusers are still active Jehovah's Witnesses in congregations. I mean, we see this all the time. We see even the Montana abuser fled to, Mexico. So far as we know, he's in a congregation down there. And one of the abusers from the Palmer leaks is still, floating around, up in the Northeast United States as a reinstated member of the organization. So anyway, so we're going to wait and see what happens in Canada. And the case you mentioned with the $4 million judgment against Watchtower, well, that's a case that's been going on for several years now as well. It's a case known as JW versus Watchtower. And the reason it's JW versus Watchtower is that it was a minor individual who is the primary plaintiff in this particular case. And the case has gone on to the point where Watchtower just couldn't fight it anymore, couldn't get it thrown out. And in fact, a lot of what happened was very similar and was even tied to or connected to the Lopez and Padron cases in California, in which Watchtower failed to produce the documents demanded by the court. And because of this, yet another default judgment was entered against the Watchtower organization for
Was this a
trying
Zalkin case?
This is an Erwin Zalkin case. Yes,
Yeah,
that's correct. And I hope to have another article on survey soon. I actually have a copy of the oral arguments, which what happened in this case was that the case was brought to the California, whatever jurisdiction in California. It wasn't the Supreme Court, but it was the jurisdiction somewhere in the San Diego region, maybe San Diego County. But the case was brought against Watchtower there, and then later it went to the appellate court. And the appellate court is really where that case was finally decided against Watchtower. Now, Watchtower, I will say this, they still have the opportunity, or they had the opportunity to make one final appeal. They do have the opportunity to appeal to the California Supreme Court. And, in talking to the Zalkin firm about the details of that case, is very, very little chance that they will get, I think it's less than 2% of cases are actually taken up by the California Supreme Court if they are not settled in the appellate court. And then their final option would be the United States Supreme Court. And I'm given on good authority that it's not going to be going to the United States Supreme Court because there were no constitutional issues that were raised in the JW versus Watchtower case. So to sum it all up, they had one final chance to appeal. We should be hearing in the next month or two about whether Watchtower, they should be writing a check this year for the $4+ million that was awarded as a judgment against them. And there's very, very little chance of them getting an appeal heard in the Supreme Court of California or in the Supreme Court of the United States. So more on that soon.
Okay, we'll stay on top of that story as much as we can. Just to wrap up our summary of 2018, and then we'll maybe go to some questions. And then I know Javier wants to do a little ceremony. We had
you guys ready?
No, we'll wait. We'll save that to the end, and then we'll do a wrap up. So first of all, we had the 2018 service year report released, which I went over in my latest video, in fact, which showed that there was weak growth in a number of key countries such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, and a number of European countries. And in fact, in Europe, 42% of Europe is in decline when you compare the 2018 figures with the figures from 10 years earlier, which I find very encouraging. So it's fascinating to see that Watchtower is to a degree soldiering on in the internet age, but there is also reason for hope. Yeah.
It's I think this is kind of what we can definitely say with Watchtower is that their best years are behind them. And what we're starting to see now is the decay. Now, what's interesting, as we've been discussing in a previous question, how fast that will be and how dramatic that will be, that's an open question. I mean, I can see a scenario where it all does start to fall apart quite quickly if the right circumstances come about, because one thing that's clear is that the people running this organization are not capable of, they're not the same kind of people who built the organization. They're not, if we look at the one thing that the videos on the internal finance meetings showed is they're all fairly incompetent, and the leadership can't really lead and doesn't really understand.
Apart from Jason Bourne, he looked like he was really competent.
Oh, the Bourne accountancy. Well, I can't say too much about him because he's actually snuck in here and he's pointing a silenced weapon at me as we speak. So I've got to be very polite about him. He's a great guy. But the rest of them they're just not very competent. They've got to where they are by being, yes men and by following the company lines. So these are not men who could build an organization like this. I think they can barely maintain it. It's it's running on the momentum it's gathered over the last 100 years, but it's what we're going to see now, I think, is how fast does the decline happen? And I think they're certainly susceptible to dramatic changes in circumstance. I mean, that's one of the reasons I'm watching what's happening in the Netherlands with such curiosity, is because now you've got, I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses are saying, oh, we always cooperate with police investigations. Well, if that's the case, why are the police having to essentially kick down the door at Bethel to get access to records for a criminal prosecution of child abusers? I think that there's a few things in play now. One of them obviously is the court cases, but there's a few things such as the internet, which, you know, Beth, you mentioned. There is kind of a perfect storm going on. And so it may well be that the decline is gradual, but I think, as you said, Lloyd, the service year figures don't lie. At the very best, they're going to slowly rot. And at the very worst, there could be some real storms on the horizon.
Yeah, I was just going to interject real quick. I think it was the 2000, you can confirm this, I think it was the 2013 Watchtower study article that mentioned we need to be ready to obey the governing body, even if from a human standpoint, our instructions don't seem very clear, you don't understand them, be ready to obey. That they've clearly have been seeing the writing on the wall for years, and I'm sure even prior to that. But that was so scary. That was so scary to me, because if you can convince people slowly and surely, steadily over the years to, you know, faithful, if you're faithful in small things, you'll be faithful in greater things, however they used to say it. But I feel like they've been conditioning people for so long that I wonder, and maybe this is just a little crazy, but I wonder if it's going to be like, they draw the parallels, people draw parallels between Jonestown, like the Kool-Aid, drinking the Kool-Aid. Well, I definitely believe witnesses are drinking the Kool-Aid, but I wonder, I don't believe that it's going to be mass murder, but I do wonder if they're going to tell the friends, it's go time, sell your homes and move into the woods. I mean, clearly they had the convention this summer with the SWAT team coming out in the woods. So who knows, maybe that's, you know.
Well, they came oddly close in 1975, didn't they? They weren't saying
that's true,
but there was a kind of a hysteria going around the witnesses who were doing it, right. And they were saying in publications, well, that's not a bad thing to do. So right. They have kind of circled Jonestown, everybody else, but this kind of like moment of madness where everyone does something very crazy that's very hard to pull back from.
Right.
They have kind of flirted with that before.
Yeah, I just wonder, because that sounds like something big is on the horizon that they know about, that, you know, we can only speculate, but I wonder if they're going to pull something like that, pull a stunt like that. Okay, here's the major moment, you know, and everybody move. Yeah, or something.
Everybody come to Walkill. Armageddon is imminent in 2 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think from like a PR perspective, I think they know it wouldn't benefit them to do that. I think they dance all the way up to the very edge of that, right. And then they never kind of step over.
That's true. Yeah.
Because I mean, it's getting, yeah, just because they can.
Yeah.
The farther we go into the 21st century, the more the doctrine and the prophecy and all that stuff doesn't make any sense, right? So it's like it's a race against time, really, and they're every time they go up to the edge, and they pull back, that pullback is getting a lot shorter, and they're going to start living closer to the edge. Right. And that's the only way I think they'll keep people in the organization, is if they keep that sense of urgency, you know, and that keeps being the focus of you know what they're teaching. Right. But other than that, yeah, they're. And I was going to ask Covert, you know, if you had to if you were a PR guy and you had to walk into the governing body conference room and give them advice, what would you tell them they should do to turn this tide around?
So if I was, what I would tell them to do is basically there are two things they can do. One is tell them that basically the instructions to all elders should be report child abuse to the authorities, and that's it. And then publicly acknowledge that the previous thing was a mistake. And the other thing would be to repeal shunning. And I think those are the only things they can do, because most of the beliefs, the actual core beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, like about, you know, they're not the kind of thing that will result in a PR disaster, because people are used to kind of relatively fundamentalist religions. And, you know, for example, in the United States, there's a wide spectrum of Christianity that goes all the way from fairly fundamentalist to fairly liberal. And I don't think that the witnesses would have a PR disaster based on most of their beliefs. The things that are a PR nightmare are the things which are actually damaging. So blood, shunning, and child abuse. But those are the things which I think the leadership impossible. If they were to back down, it would be an admission that the organization got something wrong. And it is so impossible for them to admit that. It goes so against everything they would ever believe in. It would almost be like admitting that they were atheists. I think it would be that fundamental to them. So my advice would be basically change those 3 policies and put your hands in the air and say mea culpa. That's the only way you'll diffuse it. But those are the things they can't do. I think the problem isn't fixable from a PR standpoint unless they completely about face.
Covert, while you're there, we currently have on the live stream 550 who've taken time out of their Sunday afternoon, evening, whatever time it is where you're watching, to listen in on our conversation. So thanks to all of you for tuning in. And also thanks to all of those who've sent in money through the super chat. As I mentioned at the beginning, all proceeds from this live stream will be going to the production of the Truth About the Truth documentary, which we're really hoping will get wrapped up at some point over 2019. However, Covert, before we switch to what Javier has planned, I wondered if you could give us any questions that have come through from the live chat.
Okay, so one quick question for you, Lloyd. This is from Aikian Salmanov, who says, when will the collaboration with Cosmic Skeptic and Rationality Rules take place?
I'm doing collaborations with Cosmic Skeptic all the time. In fact, I have one video which I haven't edited yet, which is where we're in London going around finding Jehovah's Witnesses doing car witnessing to speak to, which we had some fun doing in the summer, and I've just not got a chance to edit it yet. There's lots of footage that I need to go through. So that's coming, and hopefully there'll be something with Stephen with Rationality Rules at some point. You know, I'm always up for doing collaborations.
Okay. Next up, though, just to say, Bethany, there's been quite a few people giving you a shout out and saying hi and saying they love your channel as well. So,
cool. Hello.
There's one interesting comment from Jules Petiet, who says that Scientologists have put out statements about their JW friends since the special, and I've seen a few of those, as Scientology has been putting out attack articles on Leah Remini and defending the Jehovah's Witnesses. And then Jules says, with friends like that, who needs enemies? There's an interesting question. Yeah, there's an interesting question from Roger here. And this, I think, speaks to the difference between civil and criminal law. He says, since it's known that Watchtower conceals child abusers, why haven't the authorities gone into Walkill and confiscated computers and records? If this was a public company, it would be done. So I think that's worth perhaps discussing, guys. What's the difference here between a civil case and a criminal case? And why isn't this necessarily happening? Although we do, for example, know it is happening in the Netherlands.
Just to interject there, that was actually one thing that comes out hopefully in the documentary I'm working on now, which is the Reclaimed Voices documentary. Incidentally, I was hoping to get it released over Christmas. It's now looking like it will probably be January by the time it's all finished. But we had a really interesting, without wanting to spoil too much, we had a really interesting conversation with the lawyer for Reclaimed Voices on camera, in which he made the very interesting point that when we're talking about child sex abuse, the time to fix things is now. The time for the government to interject is now. The time for offices to be raided is now, because we're talking about children who are at risk now from child sex abuse. So this isn't something where a government can say, oh, well, we're working on it. Oh, we'll get some kind of, we'll start talking about having it. No, you need to fix it now. And that was quite a powerful point, which really kind of made me think, yeah, this is urgent enough for people to be literally dropping things and thinking, quick, we need to do something now to protect children.
Yeah, you have to realize that the difference with criminal and civil is, that, well, I mean, I think the user, the gentleman who asked that question is really asking, you know, why can't these authorities just go into, you know, Patterson Service Department headquarters, or rather they're in Walkill, but Patterson Legal, and just grab these files. But it's a lot more complicated than that. And some of it's constitutionally based. The fact that the religion stands behind its desire and ability to maintain their own records of what they call sin, and like I said, they claim that they report criminal matters to the police when it's mandated, but we found that in many cases they absolutely don't. So I think the short answer is that it's very difficult for law enforcement to, you really need district attorneys that want to chase down these matters. And first of all, in many states, they're no longer considered criminal misdemeanors. Like in Delaware, that was considered a civil misdemeanor. And the state of Delaware, I mean, this was, in my opinion, groundbreaking that Delaware went after Jehovah's Witnesses for failing to report. And it's just, we're just not there yet. We don't have enough cases that have been confirmed in the right way with the right amount of evidence. And the real reason, too, is that Jehovah's Witnesses are intentionally obstructing justice. I mean, we know that they now tell their elders, communicate as little as possible by email. Use our internal jw.org inbox to send messages back and forth. So there's no paper trail. They can wipe those things out with very little paper. And, they have scanned all of their documents, but they're doing less and less printed documents. They're trying to cover their tracks as much as possible. And I don't even know if we've talked about the whole records management department and Sean Bartlett as the head of records management and how he described, the destruction of documents. Watchtower actually has a destruction schedule for documents so that they can technically, legally destroy as many documents as possible without getting in trouble. So these are very complex issues, and feel free to write to us at JW Survey, and we can talk about those issues. But it's going to be a while before we see any real criminal investigation in the United States into Jehovah's Witnesses. I think Europe is going to lead the way, particularly the Netherlands and some other lands, maybe even Ireland or Sweden or Finland or Norway. So.
But to add to that, Mark, I think recently in the news, I can't remember which archdiocese it was, but there were criminal charges brought against one of the bishops here in the United States, right? So I think what
are you thinking of Cardinal Pell in Australia?
No, it was here in the States. I'll have to look it up, but
okay.
The point I was trying to make was that right now, a lot of the cases are civil. So that kind of action of raiding an office, and that usually comes in hand with criminal investigations. But I think as more viable criminal investigations start to surface up, as more attention is brought out about these issues, it's going to be tougher and tougher for the authorities to have an answer for why not get a warrant, and why aren't they going in and looking for these documents with a warrant and with a motivated criminal prosecution behind them.
It really is a religious issue. The religions have constitutional protections here in the United States and elsewhere, and that is really a lot of what's behind the insulation that they have to carry on without being taxed and getting away with things that they should not be allowed to get away with.
And they shouldn't be insulated because, as I said, it's an urgent problem right now. There are literally children who will be abused now by some perverts who wouldn't have been abused if action had been taken on this sooner. That's the situation that we're in. And it needs to change. And unfortunately, I think we're just at the wrong point in history where people aren't taking it as seriously as they need to some extent.
Yeah. I think the Me Too movement has contributed to quite a bit of raising of awareness of these issues, and that has led to more awareness and also a resurgence of what's going on with the Catholic Church because of the recent cases like the Cardinal Pell and other cases. So. But like Neil Smith said in our previous episode where we interviewed him about the Montana case, he said, reach out right away. If you're a victim, don't wait, because unfortunately, there's statute of limitations laws that he has to tell victims all the time, you're right, you're a victim, I'm sorry. But legally, we cannot file this case because Watchtower is going to win because of these ridiculous statute of limitation laws. And Some people don't report their abuse until they're 40, 50 or more years old, because they've not had the opportunity to deal with it. But that's slowly changing, and I think we're going to see those laws change here in the US and elsewhere.
So as we come up on the 2-hour mark, Javier, I know you want to do a little ceremony for Watchtower in Focus.
All right, let's get the booze on. Let's do this. All right, so I kind of I wanted to toast.
All right.
Being that this is the last time in 2018 that I'll be talking to you guys. I have my favorite drink. It's a 12-year-old.
I've actually got actual champagne, which is left over.
Oh, nice.
A meal that we had last night. So bottoms up, I guess.
So I think if there are any viewers and they have their favorite drink, and Mark, I know you like chocolate milk, so I'm sure you have it out there somewhere.
Actually, I'm really a Kool-Aid drinker myself.
No, we don't drink that anymore. Okay?
And I'm on a cleanse, so I have the most boring drink of all. There you go. I'm on my juice cleanse and my water cleanse. Happy again.
Hey, if you don't drink, this is really about acknowledging that touching glasses and chiming does not end in anything negative in your life. It's perfectly okay to do that.
Oh yeah, we can do this now.
We can do this now, exactly. But it's in honor of a fruitful and productive 2018, and in hopes of more of the same in 2019. It's been a pleasure working with everyone on here throughout the years, and I hope 2019 brings more work, more success, and more awareness to Watchtower abuses. And this one's for all the people who have been harmed negatively by harmful Watchtower policies. We're still here. We're still alive. We can touch glasses, and it's okay. And to that, I want to toast. And there you go.
Cheers. Cheers, everyone. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Cheers.
Right. So hopefully it won't impair too much on my performance in front of the camera.
I like to think it enhances our performance. What are you talking about?
Did you say that was the 12? Is that the 12-year-old Glenn Levitt? Did you say
that's 12-year-old Glenn Levitt? Yes, sir.
Glenn Levitt, nice. Yeah, that's good stuff.
And
that's the last of it too. I kind of snuck it in my little flask.
And mine's Croatian Extra Brute. So there we go.
Mine's Nescafe.
I love the stories of what
Mark's is Nestle.
Nestle's. Actually, this is Starbucks, but it'll do. I should have put something in it.
I'm looking right now at a bottle of Tullibardine 228 that I got given for Christmas that I have not opened because I'm doing dry January, and so I'm looking at this thing that I can't touch, but I will open it.
It's still December. Come on.
Anyway, whatever you're drinking, we hope you have a happy New Year. And before we end, it would be nice to just go around the panel as we always do and summarize our thoughts. In this case, on what has been a very eventful 2018. So maybe if we start with Beth.
No, don't start with me. Start with Covert. Go back.
Well, you're the least trolleyed, or among the least trolleyed at this point.
I just, since starting my channel, so many people have, seriously, people I grew up with, like 20 years ago, from my childhood in my hometown, like within 2 weeks of starting my channel, have contacted me. Thank you. Oh my God, I'm so glad you're talking about this. There's more here that you're not aware of. So I'm aware now that there's a lot of PMOs out there, and they're watching YouTube and they're on Reddit and they're doing the research. So that's just really encouraging that even if we don't see necessarily a major exodus, obviously, Stop the Shunning, that's my channel name. The shunning policy is keeping a lot of people in, and there's a lot of emotional manipulation with family and, keeping those family ties, and people are afraid, but so I don't think if there's not a mass exodus, people are definitely waking up. I'm hearing about it. A close couple of my husband and I, he's XJW Analyzer. He and I made close friends with a couple when we left the organization, and they had been listening to us for like a year, hearing our stories, but then they saw the Leah Remini special and it blew their mind. So people are waking up to it, and even outsiders, but yeah, there's a lot of PMO. That's encouraging to hear that there's people who are doing their research. They might not be able to leave yet, but they're at least waking up. So
indeed. And well done, Beth, for your work on Stop the Shunning, your YouTube channel. I think you also have a website, stoptheshunning.org.
That is correct, stoptheshunning.org.
So please head on over there, guys, if you haven't checked it out already. I think it's wonderful what you're doing in just bringing to the table what you're learning in your psychology studies, and you're bringing a really interesting perspective to things. It's so uplifting to see so many voices being added all the time on YouTube to the XJW movement.
Yes. Thank you.
Mark, do you have any concluding thoughts on 2018? You've been a busy boy, haven't you?
Well, you know what, I tell you, yeah, I want to emphasize that what Beth said was really true. When you do these videos and you reach out to people, they will reach out to you. And this year has, we've just been bombarded with emails and people who have contacted us, both from my past and from all over the US and from all over the world, thanking us or asking us questions, looking for help. In fact, it might be a good time to mention we've added Sasha and Shuri.
Yes, we've expanded the JW survey team. We've got a new webmaster. We've got a new survey editor. Chloe's moving across to doing social media. And we have a support and I can't think of the title. Sasha, support and recovery. Sasha's going to be helping out with answering emails. So the JW survey team's grown in 2018 as well.
Yeah, they're doing a terrific job, and these really mature people that were in the same situation that we were all in. And I just want to thank everybody that's reached out to me. I know that you and I did an interview a few weeks back, and I've been contacted by so many people from my past, and even people that knew people that I mentioned in that interview. And it's really revealing. 2018 has seen so many undercover or PMOs, mentally out people that have reached out to me. And many of them I'm from Maryland. I've gone out for coffee and sat down with them. One of them was just 2 days ago, and it's a very nice person who is deep inside the organization among people that I know very well, that I grew up with. And, his whole family is entrenched, his parent, I don't want to give away any identifying information, because I can just tell you that, listen, do as much research as you can, reach out to us at Survey, reach out to Beth. We're here to help you. And we're experiencing a major change in what's going on with this organizational downsizing. My parents' congregation is being dissolved as we speak. In fact, today was their last meeting it was the Loch Raven congregation in Maryland. At the same time, Pasadena, Maryland, dissolved, gone. Just got word, I think this morning, that Ellicott City, Maryland Kingdom Hall is being sold. This is just the tip of the iceberg, because multiple congregations, and this is a highly concentrated Baltimore, DC market, multiple congregations are being dissolved. And you can't tell me that this is Jehovah's expansion, because they use the opposite argument. When I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, they said, well, this expansion, and at one point we were building a Kingdom Hall every month. And this expansion was Jehovah's blessing on the work of bringing people into the truth. And now it's going in the opposite direction. They're begging for money. They're releasing people from Warwick and Patterson and they're consolidating. They've sold all of their Brooklyn properties. And now in fact, just a few weeks ago, I think, or last week, they sold the final Brooklyn property, and now it's all gone. And they're living on that money
they made on Brooklyn.
$2 billion. Yeah. We recently, in the Montana case, we had it revealed that Watchtower itself owns $1.6 billion in assets. So we're seeing that go in the opposite direction. And, we're here as a safety net to help each other out, to help people out of the organization. And like we said before, we don't know, the organization is going to be around for a long time. But if we can prevent the shunning, the blood policy, give people a landing place, then we've done our job. So thanks to everybody that's reached out, and thanks, Lloyd, for your channel. We are inundated with contacts from people that are thankful of your videos and also some of the articles on survey. So cheers to the whole team.
It certainly keeps us busy. And Covert, do you have any concluding thoughts on 2018?
I think it's been a year where the Watchtower brand really started to turn toxic. I've never seen this much public coverage in the media of Watchtower, and of the worst possible aspects of the child abuse issue, of all of the things that when I was a Jehovah's Witness, I took pride in the fact that we weren't like other religions. Well, now it seems like increasingly, the only thing people really ever talk about Jehovah's Witnesses in the media now, it's not about those funny people who knock on the doors. It's like the child abuse cover-ups or the 2-witness rule. So on the one hand, I think it's been a dreadful year for Watchtower. I think it's been a fantastic year for activism. But the thing that I really love is that there are people who are listening to us right now, probably, or there are people who this year maybe celebrated their first Christmas, because last year they were in this organization and they were trapped and they were brainwashed, and now they're free. And this year maybe was their first Christmas. Or maybe they're free and they didn't celebrate Christmas this year because they didn't feel quite up to it. But at the very least, they knew that that was their choice. It wasn't a choice that was being mandated to them by Watchtower. And so I think that XJWs than there were last year. And yes, and every single day, because I think sometimes we think in terms of like it's only going to be a good year when Watchtower finally disappears forever. Well, that's going to be a very long thing. But if we focus on the fact that every single day more and more people are waking up and leaving this organization, that every single day more and more people are becoming free, then I think that's a really positive thing. And I just want to say a big shout out to anyone who's listening to us now, who, if this time last year you were a Jehovah's Witness and now you're free, I just want to say hello, welcome to the world. It's an awesome place to be, even though it can be scary sometimes. We're all here for you. We're all in the same boat, but now you're finally in control of your life and you get to decide what kind of life that's going to be. So seriously, sit down, work out some new or work with your life in 2019 and go make it happen, because you're free.
Superb. And if anyone isn't yet subscribed to, is it JW? No, actually, it's the Covert Fade YouTube channel, but there's also the
yes, the JW Forwardcast podcast at you can find us on iTunes at JW Forwardcast. I have a YouTube channel, YouTube/Covert Fade. I've forgotten the rest of the advertising patter, but yes, basically the podcast, we talk about life after leaving, how you can overcome the challenges of putting your life back together again. I interview lots of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and increasingly I've got some interviews coming up with people from other former high control faiths. And it's all about putting your life back together again after you leave. So if that's something that appeals to you guys, come check us out, JW Forwardcast on iTunes.
Indeed, a good podcast for you to begin 2019 with. And as Javier necks another dram of whiskey, Javier, actually, we've been. It's worth noting as well that we've had a lot of donations through for the Truth About the Truth documentary through the super chat, and I'm sure you join me in thanking everybody who has donated to our project. Am I right in saying that there is a PayPal link if anyone's watching this video afterwards and they feel like they want to help out the production?
There is. I have to get it for you. I don't have it in front of me right now.
Well, we can sort that out afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is through Director Juan Escobedo's website. There's a link for people who would like to make contributions to the project, and I'll get that to you. So
okay.
So you'll have it.
So all I need now is your mildly inebriated thoughts on 2018.
Well, this one's going to be easy because I'm at that point now where I just love everybody. And
I love you, man.
I love you. No, I just it's good that you did this, because when you're kind of in the mix all the time, you don't appreciate how much progress you've made and all the things that have happened throughout the year. It really was a lot of kind of important milestones that occurred in 2018. So it makes going into 2019 a lot more hopeful. But just to add to Covert's sentiments about people who might have been in the organization last year and are kind of out and about and kind of discovering this vast new world, there are challenges, but whatever it costs you to be free, I hope that you'll find in 2019 and the rest of 2018 that it is worth the cost. It really is. And I don't share too much about my personal life on here, but and I think I can speak for everyone on the panel. As we work in this and the activism and raising awareness and all that stuff, we're also going through it, right? I've had some conversations with family members this year that basically meant they were letting me go permanently. So those were hard conversations to have. But when I look at where I am today from 5 years ago and where my family is today from 5 years ago, the freedom really it's priceless. I mean, the fact that we can chat about the stuff that we're chatting about without fear or no longer be afraid of some doctrine that scared us in the past. That really is freedom. And so we have that now. And I hope that you guys find that in 2019 as well. And that's all I have to say about that. So again, cheers.
Cheers. Well said. And I'm just very grateful to be remotely coherent after one glass of champagne and entering my second. But I can't thank you all enough for joining episode 19 of Watchtower in Focus. Thank you to the over 500 who are actually watching these words live, but also to, I'm sure, many more who will watch this video once it is finished and uploaded. But we really do appreciate all of the lovely comments, all of the questions that we've been receiving over the live chat, all of the donations to the Truth About the Truth project that have been very kindly and generously still coming through right now. Anonymous Vaughn has sent through $20. Tuya Myla has sent through 100 of some denomination I don't even know. But it's very, very grateful. I'm very grateful for it, and it will all go into the pot in helping the Truth About the Truth come to fruition sooner rather than later. We're hoping to wrap up production in 2019. But honestly, it's very heartening to see so much enthusiasm for this live stream. I hope you found our discussion useful, but I just want to thank Covert, Javier, Mark, and Beth for joining me.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thanks, Lloyd. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hopefully not for the last time. And to all of my co-hosts and to all of you watching on the live stream and to all of you who will be watching once this is later uploaded, please allow me to speak for the rest of the team in wishing you a very happy and prosperous 2019. And thank you so much for watching.